Matt Getz, who is our RPG producer, who's really taken the helm recently and started to really drive forward the Iron Kingdoms RPG experience in terms of both Unleashed and the Monsternomicon that we just previewed during the staff panel. So we want to talk, and this is just really a free-form kind of forum where we're going to discuss about stories, we're going to talk about the beginnings and the origins and things like that. And so we really just want to start with Matt talking about the beginning. So the genesis for Privateer Press was the Iron Kingdoms RPG. And when did the original idea come from? What were some of its influences? All of that good stuff. So Matt, if you can go ahead and regale us with some tales about the start of the Iron Kingdoms.
The Iron Kingdoms. Wait, am I on?
You're on.
Is it working? Okay, it's working. I just got to get closer to it. So the Iron Kingdoms started as kind of an experiment. It was a few friends who wanted to see if they could put something together and publish something that was interesting with really an eye towards quality. It was in the beginning, it was a lot about the artwork, and I think for me, my selfish motivation was that I wanted to be able to draw and paint the pictures that I wanted to do. I was doing a lot of freelance contract work for different companies. I was doing a lot of work for other games that I really enjoyed the work, but it wasn't the stuff that was necessarily in my head or motivating me at the time. And so this was an opportunity to do things that I was coming up with. Didn't have to work with another art director telling me what I could or couldn't do. Didn't have to work with an R&D team that could tell me what I could or couldn't do. But the grand experiment was really kind of, if we do something that looks great, will people like it? And so that's what we started with. And the original idea was, it was during the time when the Wizards of the Coast had launched the Dungeons and Dragons open gaming license. And so we thought, let's get in on that. Let's take advantage of that, right? This is something where like people already understand the game. We don't necessarily have to write the game or develop it. We can make the stories and make the pictures that go along with that, and kind of do what we as artists and writers were interested in doing. This was drawing pictures and writing stories. And that it grew beyond us pretty quickly, but we did. We started with this thing called the Witchfire Trilogy, and it really started with like an idea with a name, right? The Witchfire and what that might mean, and we started to develop the character of Alexia and this story around her, and the story that started to grow out of that was one that was, instead of us creating a book that was a dungeon delve and just, your characters go into a dungeon and fight monsters and get treasure. It was like, can we tell something that is dramatic, and can we make character the focus of the story? So Alexia was born, and she became this sort of anti-hero that the player characters, the PCs, they interact with through the course of the story. And while they're the heroes, she's still such an important part of the story that we get to really get to know her character, and the characters get to do something significant in the world in relation to her. And as that started to take shape, the world started to take shape. And that was kind of the interesting thing, because we didn't go into it thinking we're going to develop a whole new intellectual property, right? I wanted to draw pictures about a cool looking chick and zombies, and a mean looking sword, and there was a whole bunch of other ideas that started to sort of infiltrate this. And this is way back before steampunk was really a big thing. It was kind of at the time it was something that was starting, right? It was a new genre, and I never characterized the Iron Kingdoms as steampunk, but those things were influencing the decisions that we were making in the development of this world and the artwork and whatnot. So Warjacks were born. My microphone's all over the place. And the whole idea of Warjacks, these semi-sentient robots powered by steam, were like, they became a kind of a cornerstone of the setting. And we started to build the world around this idea of technology and magic working together. And we gave it the name Mechanica. And that right there is sort of like the seed that the Iron Kingdoms grew from. Mm-hmm. And without intending to, we started to develop a world. And as we got into it, we realized that what we were doing was new and fresh and original and a lot of fun. And we were playing two different sides at the same time, because we wanted to make a product with this Witchfire Trilogy that was something that would appeal to players of Dungeons and Dragons, right? So we knew that was the audience for this book that we were going to be making. At the same time, we wanted to do things that were our own and that we thought were maybe counterintuitive or not necessarily appealing to the Dungeons and Dragons audience at large. So we were constantly sort of like covering our bets. Like, could we put firearms into fantasy in a way that appealed to people? Because that seemed like a core concept of the setting. Could we put steam-powered robots? Could we have trains and things like that? One thing at a time, it all kind of came together. But the big thing was, could we tell a story? Could we make it about characters? And could we do something that was interesting and fun? And like I said, selfishly, something that I wanted to paint pictures about.
So at this time, as the Witchfire Trilogy kind of coalesced, I just want to have Doug and Jason both talk a little bit about how they came into the process, and tell us a little bit about your introduction. Like, what did you think when you saw this property, and what drew you to it? What drew you in?
So for me, I got involved really early. I basically got involved right around the second book of the Witchfire Trilogy. There had already been a really strong, good response to the first book of the Witchfire Trilogy. And I just remember looking at some of the early art that Matt had and Brian Snowdy had created, and I could tell that there was a real strong flavor there that was something I had never seen before. And even in the early work of the Witchfire Trilogy, there was the sense of this larger world. They basically brought me in to kind of help out with reviewing some of the material that was being made. And I think even early along, even if they weren't entirely sure how far they wanted to go with it, there was already talk of maybe we could make a setting out of this. Maybe we could make a book that would be a setting Bible, a setting book for this setting. And, I was brought in as basically somebody who could create a lot of words very quickly. And so they approached me with the idea of, hey, are you willing to write maybe like a 200-page little book on this setting, and we can kind of flesh out all the details. At the time, everything that was written about the setting was basically maybe like a 10-page document that just kind of had a summary of the different kingdoms, summary of the different gods. They did have a lot of the core kernels of what the setting would become, but they were really short, very concise. And I promised to basically make them less concise. And,
something you excel at.
Yeah, something I excel at. And I remember very vividly early in that process, Matt making the unfortunate decision where basically I told him, I was like, 200 pages seems, like, I don't know, this outline seems like it's going to be a lot longer, what I'd really like to see, we haven't seen in other role-playing games them really delving into the world in any depth. Why can't we just dive into this and give all that detail that people want to have? And Matt was like, yeah, let's do that. Just write, like, don't even worry about how long anything is. Just write, and we'll see what happens. I'm sure it'll work out in the end. And
Last time that was ever
Yes.
said to Doug.
yes, absolutely. And one thing turned into another, and pretty soon we had 800 pages of material. So
Pretty not soon.
We may still be dealing with the repercussions from that decision.
So Jason, tell us real quick, what's your story in terms of coming into the Iron Kingdoms and Privateer Press and
So-
the RPG?
I walked into my friend's game store one day, and no one can ever hear me. So I walked into my friend's game store one day, and he showed me this great new Witchfire series. I think it was either the first or the second one. I picked it up, thumbed through it, and said, I want to work for these guys someday. And then, about a few weeks later, I realized I had already worked for Matt for a while. I just didn't realize that he had done it. So my next real experience with it was at some point we had you all had the first Ironclad model sculpted, which was really the genesis for War Machine way back in the day. It was before the game was a game. It was just they decided to do a promo model. So Matt and Mike gave me an Ironclad to paint up, and so I painted that up because I love that thing. And then we started talking about War Machine, and one of the first things I got handed was the Monsternomicon that came out almost immediately after I started working on War Machine. And so I had the job of taking everything in the Monsternomicon and starting to translate into models and start to figure out what abilities we could apply and how. So, go ahead.
No, you just made me remember a pretty funny story. Well, I don't know. It was funny. Maybe it's not funny at all. Maybe it's just grim and too real. But
That sounds great. Please continue.
and I might have even told this last year when we did the War Machine War Stories panel. But the moment that I knew that Jason needed to be a part of Privateer Press was when we did the release of the Monsternomicon and the original pre-releases for War Machine at Gen Con in 2003, right? I think.
2002?
Was it 2002? 2000, 2002 or 2003, right? Yeah. Let's just say. Give or take a year.
2002.
2002. And we were at Gen Con that year, and we had a tiny little end cap booth, 10 by 20. And in the front of it were our display cases with our painted promo models of the Signar and Protectorate battle boxes. And then we had boxes and boxes of the Monsternomicon and a couple of demo areas around these tables. And Jason showed up to Gen Con with, I think, was a potentially fatal flu. And as we sold the Monsternomicon and tried to show people the War Machine game, Jason powered through 4 days of demos with just beads of sweat coming down his face. His shirt was soaked and everything, and he looked like death. I thought this guy's gonna die. Honestly, I didn't know Jason that well at the time, and but I was so impressed. It's like this is a guy that needs to be part of our team. And then the rest is history.
Can I step back a little bit with another anecdote from
yeah,
around that time?
please.
So one of the main things I remember, this came back to me as we were showing the Monsternomicon video and remembering back to that original Monsternomicon. Back at the time, most of us that were working on it weren't actually, here in a single company. We were all working remotely, sending emails, across the nation. And I remember as the book was coming together for the final, time, Matt was basically having to assemble the entire thing himself in, the various software programs. He was sending PDFs to those of us who were in other states to review. I think I was working in a bar or something. I got back from a really late night shift at a bar, stayed up all night reviewing PDFs because he had to deliver this thing in the morning. And I think Matt almost got in a car accident on his way to deliver the files to the FedEx
I-
machine? Like you mentioned something about, I think you did have a near-death experience on your way to delivering the Monster Nomicon.
I think that was one of the first times I said, what the hell am I doing? Why am I doing this?
Yeah.
And I'll never do it again. And
did
then
it again.
like a year later, I think I repeated that with War Machine Prime. But yeah, I honestly don't remember the near-death experience.
You had
but-
probably been up like
But
48
I do
hours or
remember
something by
wanting
that point.
to just hang myself over that whole experience. It was like, yeah, the final push on the Monster Nomicon was like to get it to the printer in time to print it and have it delivered to Gen Con. And I think we shipped it directly there.
Yeah, I think you shipped it to Gen Con.
and delivered it there. It was
We did against
it was
escalation, by the
4
way.
or 5 or 6 days straight of just no sleep, like round the clock, literally no sleep. Because back then, we're working on a crappy desktop computer that
Yeah.
you'd save off a PDF of like 10 pages and it would take 10 minutes, right, or longer, right? And then there was incompatibility problems. We were working in software that didn't necessarily line up with what the printer was working in. And we were kind of new at all this stuff too. I'd worked in pre-press and set up products to print before, but like back then there wasn't a lot of standardization to this stuff,
Yeah.
right? It was pretty early, and like not just on our side, but even on the printing side, people were still figuring things out, and it was not a good time to be up against a deadline.
No.
So speaking of swearing that you'd never do it again, we then move on and we wound up with not only a character guide, but a world guide, which is probably about that 800 pages.
It's about that
Doug was-
800-page problem that I was talking about before.
So
Neither of which were planned.
And actually, it might have been more like 1,000 pages, I think, originally.
It was at least 1,000.
So, whose idea was it really? Like overall, you mentioned that you wanted to build 800. You wrote 800 pages. They said,
Well,
no,
I just kept telling
no
them, I'm
problem.
like, they kept saying, just write, everything. They wanted all of it. And so I remember our editor at the time was like, this isn't really going to fit into a 400-page book. And so they were trying to consider, what 60 to 70% of the material we had generated would need to be eliminated. And I remember being really stressed out about that, where I'm like, all that work, just flushed down the toilet. And I think it must have been something on Matt's side where they're finally like, well, we could do 2 books, maybe.
There was a lot of like constant revision and adaptation to what we were doing. And the thing about Privateer, since we started with the RPGs, and it's always followed through with War Machine and Hordes and everything that we've done, is we never let ourselves be led by the economics of a situation. It's always been about the creativity, right? It's been about the art and what we wanted to achieve because we were excited about it at the time. And the RPG was definitely something that like had the ability to run away with us, without being able to be reined in. But we had so much there that we wanted to be able to create and share and get into print in some way. That almost never did we have like a concept for a product that ended up like looking like the actual product that we created. It was, like something else would fall out of it because we'd have too much, or we'd get other ideas through there. And it was, I think because we were excited about it, right? We were
absolutely.
We were always so energized about what we were doing, and it was like, wow, we're creating something that's fun and cool, and we want to do more with it. We just couldn't contain it, and also Doug writes a lot of words.
Speaking about that excitement, that energy, not being able to contain it, having these great ideas, there are a couple of products that might have been mentioned at the time that
Do we have a slide?
may have not. I tried really hard to find a slide of this
Really?
this advertisement. We could not find one.
It's in
But-
like the first printing, I think.
So like, the first Witchfire book came out, and it did very well for us. It was well received. People liked it. We reprinted it immediately. I think we did 3 or 4 reprints on that book before we got to a point where we eventually compiled it later. And I think after the first one, we're like, oh, we're building a world, right? We've got this thing called the Iron Kingdoms, and it's getting big. And I don't remember if it was the second or the third book. The more things change, the more they stay the same, right? Like that's what we still do. Even recently with Unleashed, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was we made decisions there because what we thought we were going to do became bigger, and we realized that we had something more to do that with. And pretty soon, instead of a follow-up book to the Iron Kingdoms core book, we're making Unleashed.
And just one other little anecdote from that time. Jason will probably remember this, but there's some interesting ways in which the original role-playing game and War Machine sort of fed into each other and influenced one another.
I'm going
'cause
to
they were
talk some
kind of-
more about that.
They were happening concurrently, but with 2 different teams. There were different people working on each, kind of with Matt as the bridge between. And I remember pretty vividly that we had written a ton of material for what would eventually become the World Guide, but it was set before the Lealese War. And so all of a sudden Matt tells me that they're working on this escalation thing, and well, that country that you were writing about, it's pretty much invaded and doesn't exist anymore.
So is this on? Can anybody hear me?
Yeah, speak.
Yeah.
So I have some insight there. So we end up in a case of parallel development where the RPG guys are writing one thing, and War Machine was getting serious quick on another thing, and we are developing the politics faster than they were. So in addition to cutting down this book to 400 pages, Joe ended up coming out to edit the thing in-house, and he knew it was going through my head, so he ended up doing it in a closed office so I couldn't get my hands on the character guide. So I got to read about how they translated all of my stuff once the book came out.
Yeah, this was the first of many battles between Jason and I, except we just didn't know that we were fighting at the time.
But I flanked him on this one because we got escalation out, which, by the way, was another all-nighter, like our 8th one. But so I got to take Doug's world and start putting a war through it.
Yeah,
And
wreck
I
all my
started
cities.
rewriting Lael and line up his guys and, line up to save ammo. And there they went.
So, after the World Guide, after Five Fingers, which was the last of the 3.5 book, Dungeons & Dragons, obviously the old system was under the 3.5 license, went to 4.0. At that point, we experienced a little bit of a lull in terms of releases for the RPG as we try to figure out internally what was going on. But all of that leads us to the next part of our story, which actually starts to introduce myself, Ed, and Matt Getz, which is the Rebirth, the 2nd edition. So the first question goes back to the old guard crew here of when did the idea of the 2nd edition really come into being?
I don't even like calling it a 2nd edition, right? Like, I don't feel like it's a progression of the original as much as like a reincarnation of it, right? It's we through all of the open license stuff, like we were always challenged because we had ideas for this world that we could not translate into the rules that existed in the OGL and for the D20 stuff. And it wasn't for lack of trying, but it was largely for lack of not having a good expert in-house on those rules. So we sort of struggled with them. And there was things like Warcasters, for instance, right? Which we had these big ideas for, but they just did not fit, right? We were constantly trying to shove a square peg through a round hole and not feeling like we had achieved the fantastical vision in the mathematical rules. These two things weren't aligned. So when things got weird with the the OGL and we weren't sure where it was going to go, we kind of like we sort of hit the pause button to see where things were going to end up, and we continued to support the RPG through No Quarter with new content and articles. But that was largely creating new information about the world and not as much about rules. And then eventually we did hit that sort of dead calm where nothing was coming out about the RPG, and it wasn't there. I don't think there was ever a point where we weren't talking about what's next for it, but there was a long gap between, Five Fingers and the new Iron Kingdoms RPG. But in that time, we probably reinvented the RPG 4, 5, or 6 times.
I can be more specific. By 2008, we were already starting to work on another game for the RPG. And by this point, the RPG and War Machine, Hordes, the whole world, we had things tightened down. There was no parallel development. We were all doing it in tandem. So I think in 2008, we started working on the first version of what would become the IK RPG, which I ended up writing 3 rule sets before we finally got that thing down.
Yeah, we explored all kinds of different avenues for it, whether or not, like, should it be based on a board game? Should it be card-based? Should it have pre-painted miniatures, right? Like, there was so many different things that we went through to try and figure out what the right sort of way to present the RPG and the product and that experience that we wanted to give people of adventuring in the setting, right? Not commanding an army and playing out these wars that are based on political struggles between warring nations, but like, what is the adventurer experience in the Iron Kingdoms RPG or in the Iron Kingdoms setting, and then eventually somehow we pared it all down until we came back to, what became the Iron Kingdoms Full Metal Fantasy RPG core book.
So Ed, talk a little bit about, you and I were there in 2008, 2009. We started work on the RPG later on in 2010, I believe. And what was your sense? What are some of the things that you thought as we moved into this project, knowing that you had to visualize this world in a new way, building on the old?
Well, honestly, it was very exciting to sort of dig into the visuals of the Iron Kingdoms. Okay, so with War Machine and Hordes, although they take place in a very specific world that we've put tons and tons of thought into, we haven't actually shown huge amounts of visuals outside of characters in those worlds. So one of the things that Matt said, I think sometime probably mid-2010, was that he really wanted us to start showing off more of the world within Hordes and War Machine, just in the art for those books, as we were gearing up to start the artwork for the Iron Kingdoms. To be able to dig in and really figure out what the landmarks within these different nations look like, their temples, their fortresses, their castles, the city walls of Caspia and things like that. So while we still focus very much on characters in the core rulebook and dialing those in and trying to make the differences between what it meant to be an RPG character versus a more militaristic character in War Machine, the real fun for me was when we started digging into the world's design on Kings, Nations, and Gods, and being able to work with art director Mike Valancourt and a lot of our talented artists out there to start digging up resources and sourcing images of historical cities and things that really influenced us, and then to be able to run these past Matt and then kind of show him, here's the direction that we're going with your world, and to get that really sort of positive response that we had from him when we get to show him, what the walls of Ord look like, what the Caspian walls look like when you're in Castle Railthorn, right? It was a pretty amazing experience, especially because I had started with the Witchfire Trilogy, like many of us up here, digging into this world. And to be part of realizing those visuals is quite the the player dream come true.
It wasn't just visuals though, right? Like there's an interesting note that you were one of the first GMs for the new system.
I was probably the first GM for the new system. I ran a number of internal playtest scenarios and some externals, but I was the one that had to basically GM for Matt and Jason Souls for the first time. So no pressure there, but I find myself to be a pretty good storyteller when I have to make somebody else run through the story because they figure the end out.
Ed was a great GM, and I actually remember those early playtest experiences. I don't know if Will was the best party mate, and we had some pretty interesting tales from that where Jason and I had some pretty good plans on how to take on
DC
Ed's opposition, and then no one paid attention to the plan.
To be fair,
Like-
DC is the one who set fire to the whole facility, not me.
It was
You were
DC's
running
fault.
off, and and then all of a sudden, and then I think Jason just sort of responded to that, and he's like, "Well, I'm just going to rack up kill count."
Well, no,
He's going off, and then pretty soon we have no plan anymore.
Matt, I do recall beginning to go into this exposition, and you were like, "Playtest, I shoot him in the face." Encounter number 1.
Oh, well, that was also the one where nobody wanted to. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so we're walking past as a party. Tell you about our characters now.
They were trying to avoid
We're
confrontation.
walking past a cemetery where there was clearly some shit going down, right? And everybody else is like, "Oh, we don't have time. Like the guys that hired us to do this stuff are paying us by the hour. We have to get on down the road." And I'm like, "It's playtest. It's time for combat." And so we started shooting people. I started shooting people.
And that's when we realized some of
Yeah.
the flaws in our combat system, but that's what playtest is all
But
about.
that was what it was about. But these guys just want to talk their way through it. That's not. So we're not rolling any dice for that. Come on.
So Matt gets down at the table. It's now your turn. We've gotten through this point. We are well into Kings, Nations, and Gods when we brought you on, and you got literally thrown into the frying pan in terms of here is the Iron Kingdoms, here's what we're trying to accomplish, and all this stuff to come. Talk a little bit not only about that experience, but also if you can give us a little preview Unleashed, because I think there's another pretty famous playtest game with Matt Wilson that has been making the rounds at the office lately.
I would love to talk about Kings, Nations, and Gods and starting in it, but I really want to back up and talk about you playtesting.
Oh,
When we were playtesting Kings, Nations, and Gods, Will went out of his way, ridiculously out of his way, to murder his fellow players
I learned from the best.
in the most creative ways
never
possible.
raised a hand.
So, no, my first experience with Kings, Nations, and Gods, really my first staff experience, was being handed a number of very, very large files by our editorial manager, Darla, saying, "You're gonna need to read these." And looking at the timeline, I'm like, oh wow, it starts all the way back then. Wait, how many years are in this game? And flipping forward, I'm like, we're 608 after the rebellion? Oh man. And then going back and rereading, and I was put on the play test early on, where I learned that you are a murderous, vile person, Will. Continued working forward and started working as the RPG producer in a more forward role on Unleashed, where early on we had a play test with Matt Wilson and you is DC and Simon? Yeah, Simon, yeah. So if you're ever playing in a game with Mr. Wilson and he's playing a Gator Man, don't put NPCs in front of him to talk. They'll get like a line, half a line, and he'll say, "Wait, I can bite this guy?
I eat him.
I'm gonna bite this guy."
To be fair, after he ate him, then he questioned him. Unleash is friggin' cool.
It was one of the best RPG experiences I ever had, and that was the most satisfying anyway. And it was just a play test. And I'll back up first because for whatever flack we're giving Will for being a murderous son of a bitch when it comes to role-playing games, like I said, we're constantly adapting and changing our game plan when it comes to our products in general and the RPGs very specifically. And I think Will had a vision for how our RPGs would lay out early on in terms of like how the products would sort of relate to each other. And we were like, nah, Will, that's not how it goes. We don't do that. We're not going to make RPGs like that. And then one day we had a meeting and we were like, we should do Unleashed instead of just like a supplement and make it like its own book. And as the words are coming out of my mouth, I'm realizing that's what Will had actually proposed like a year and a half before. And
I was particularly, I particularly owe you an apology.
so this is our like.
I'm eating crow on that.
We're sorry, Will.
Yeah,
You were right.
accepted.
Will was right.
Now the world knows.
Yeah, now everybody knows that Will had it all figured out before we did.
Matt wouldn't have gotten to Gaptate Bog Trogs without you.
I would not have gotten to have the fun that I had playing a homicidal gator man with a gun in that game. And that was like for, I don't know, it's probably a 3-hour play session. And I laughed my ass off that entire game. It was so much fun. And I can't even tell you right now because we're live streaming this what we did during that game, what I did during that game. But the liberation of the liberating experience, the liberating feeling of being able to play a gator man who could eat the NPCs was.
Ben questioned them.
And yeah, if I cared, it was awesome. It was awesome. But it was really like that whole game. We were all just laughing and doing crazy things, and I realized that like Unleashed was the thing that had been missing from my role-playing game experience all my life. Like I'm like, where has this been? This is what I always wanted to do.
So we're running out of time, but I wanted to talk really quick about the future, and I think we've really hit on Unleashed specifically, but we've also got a Scorn-specific supplement in the works that Mr. Matt Getz is working on, along with Jason Souls. And then last but not least, I'm going to let Matt Wilson leave us off with our little cliffhanger note about what else is to come.
Are we talking about this? We're talking about this.
Well, you're just supposed to. Here,
Does anybody have any guesses?
I'll give you the line.
Already working on the next corner of the Iron Kingdoms, the seed of which was planted way back in a single mention within the original world guide. Oh yeah, that's right. We're gonna let you guys dig for it. Yeah. So it's like one line in the original world guide, right? Doug, did we unpack any of it in there?
There's a call out.
Is there a call out?
There's a short call
There's
out.
a call out.
Oh, now we blew it.
And I'm not going to say what it is, but it is. I really think in terms of the RPG, the stuff that we are working on right now and that's coming up is like, it will be one of the coolest things we've ever done. And we're having a lot of fun with it. We're starting to concept it, and I really just kind of want to let people speculate on what might come next. But I will tell you, it is this like little tiny piece of the Iron Kingdoms that has barely ever been mentioned. And we're going to just blow it wide open into this really awesome experience that's going to span the RPG. We have a board game plan. We've got fiction planned. We've got so many things planned for this. And it's something that is unique to the Iron Kingdoms and very special to the Iron Kingdoms. It's something that we've wanted to do for years and years and years, and we're finally getting to do it.
So with that, I will say thank you to my fellow panelists, as well as thank you to everyone watching here at Lock Load 2014 in Bellevue, Washington, as well as the rest of the world on live stream, for coming out, joining us, listening to us wax and wane about these fun memories and stories. Hopefully you all had as much fun as we did, and we will see you very shortly for Iron Painter 2014 at Lock
Iron
Load.
Painter.
That did not crack the surface. We could talk for another 2 years.